Our final presenter today is Sarah Yeager-Peck. Sarah was born and raised in Northeast Texas. She is a graduate student of history at the University of Texas at Tyler, where she focuses on environmental history, particularly natural history and interpretation within Texas. Sarah currently lives with 1 cat, 3 dogs, and 2 horses in the piney woods outside of Tyler, where she is continuously learning from the landscape. When trapped indoors, she enjoys reading, knitting, and other fiber arts. Weather permitting, Sarah can often be found birdwatching, hiking, camping, and otherwise exploring with friends and family. The title of her presentation is 2 Ducks, Gus Engeling, Alton, Paris, and the Common Tragedy. Please join me in welcoming Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to the GLO for putting this on, of course, and especially the staff and the team working so hard to make this run smoothly for us all. And also a special shout out to my mom for my original love of Texas history, and also the faculty and staff at UT Tyler, who have really encouraged and supported a lot of my research, which is a little off the wall for some people. So, what does it mean to poach? We can use it in cooking or to describe illegal hunting. We can definitely say there's more than one way to poach a duck. It's the responsibility of the hunter to be up to date with laws and regulations regarding duck hunting in Texas. Today, Texan hunters are allowed a 6-duck daily bag limit with a variety of species available to mix and match. You're most likely to come across mallards, but wood ducks, pintail, redheads, canvasback, a bird called scaup, which is a duck, and the American widgeon, as well as a variety of other species, use Texas airspace and waterways to move south for the winter. In Texas, duck season runs from mid-November to late January. If a person harvests a wild duck outside of these parameters and without the proper permitting, they're also poaching duck, whether hunting for sport or hunting for food. On December 13th, 1951, game warden and wildlife biologist Gus Engeling was shot and killed by a poacher illegally hunting at the Durden Wildlife Management Area, which is 20 miles northwest of Palestine, Texas. In honor of his life, the Wildlife Management Area, also known as a WMA, bears his name today. The story often ends there, but it's incomplete and obscured. The facts of the case are muddled from the beginning, whether they take the form of missing eyeglasses, dubious investigative work, or imprecise and prejudiced reporting. On the surface, the story is simple, but if we widen the frame to include the environment in which the incident occurred, the story can provide important insights about land use, exclusion, and survival on Texas's public lands. Who was this poacher, and what drove him to murder that day? There's no doubt that Alton Paris was guilty of shooting Gus Engeling, but the true motive and actual facts of the incident remain lost in the bottomland of Catfish Creek. The 2 men were the only ones present, the only humans present. But the social, cultural, and ecological environments in which this tragic case occurred provide important clues about the incident as well as the fallout. To do both men justice, the story needs conservation, clarification, and careful conversation. There's no doubt that Alton Paris was guilty of shooting Gus Engeling. First off, I would like to be clear that this is not intended to be an intriguing true crime story, although you can hear it on a true crime podcast. But reviewing the newspaper coverage of this case only reveals a tragic, racially charged event that seems to me as a researcher to have less to do with the men's interactions as individuals and way more to do with the broader environmental factors occurring in this little pocket of East Texas. Ultimately, this story can only show us the true potential costs of conservation, because ecological restoration doesn't happen outside of human society. So, I would like to introduce you to 2 environments. The first is the physical, ecological environment in which the incident occurred. And the second is the racially charged social environment that hit a flashpoint in this natural world. Welcome to 1950s East Texas. By 1950, Texas wildlife was suffering from crises. Between overhunting, habitat loss, and overuse of pesticides, populations of game animals like white-tailed deer, turkey, and waterfowl were all struggling, and the state conservation authorities were working hard to rebuild their numbers throughout the state. Habitat restoration was, and remains, a key component of these efforts. The Durden WMA was established that year to conserve a large remnant of the disappearing post-oak savanna ecoregion. We can see Catfish Creek along this map right here. This map was sourced from the U.S. Geological Survey. It is from 1950. It is the northeastern pocket of Anderson County. It was originally named for the Durden family, who sold the unusually diverse habitat to the state. Because the bottomland forest was marshy and difficult to farm, the family hadn't cleared the land like a lot of the surrounding area, and so it provided a unique opportunity for study and conservation, and it featured mixed hardwood forests, marshland, and 3 bogs, which it still has. More specifically, the WMA encloses roughly half of the Catfish Creek ecosystem, which is a relatively undisturbed and thus rare spring-fed wetland stretching across both private and public property. The Catfish Creek begins 9 miles south of Athens, Texas, and flows for 30 miles before joining the Trinity River to the southwest. You can see it here in the former map. Catfish Creek runs top right here and into the Trinity River down below. This bottomland provides important habitat for tons of plants and animals. It's home to over 1,000 plant species, as well as a variety of wildlife, including venomous snakes, white-tailed deer, turkey, pileated woodpeckers, alligator, beaver, and plenty of ducks. According to the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, wildlife management areas, or WMAs, were originally established to perform research on wildlife populations and habitat, to educate the public on sound resource management, and to provide opportunities for public recreation such as hiking, camping, birdwatching, and hunting. However, policies restricting access to these resources, historically considered necessary for self-sufficiency, could put locals into conflict with government authorities. Poachers were the primary threat to the safety of game wardens, and conflicts between the warring schools of thought could result in shootings and death. This was the world of Gus Engeling. The white 33-year-old had been recently hired at the Durden WMA to oversee wildlife restocking and management efforts. He and his young family had just moved to Anderson County from near the Houston area for his new job. In a 1949 article about mottled ducks, he preached against the perils of loose domestic dogs and cats and said, "In one day of careful observation, I've come across domestic dogs destroying duck, quail, and dove nests, as well as catching and eating several young ducks from a brood which was approximately 4 weeks old. It's difficult to underestimate the yearly loss to this one arch destroyer of wildlife." Those are Gus's words. He doesn't want you to let your domestic animals loose. He was a husband and a father of 3 children, and he was clearly more passionate about his work as a wildlife biologist than he was about being a game warden, though his job title included both. On the morning of Thursday, December 13th, 1951, he wasn't wearing a service weapon. Around 10:30 a.m. that day, he was speaking with a pipeline crew working at the WMA when a group heard gunfire from nearby Catfish Creek. A startled flock of ducks was seen flying out of the area, and Engeling walked into the woods to investigate. Roughly 15 minutes later, the pipeline crew heard another shot. When Engeling didn't return to his post later that day, a search party was dispatched. Temperatures plummeted that night. For nearly 3 days, roughly 200 people, including law enforcement, local volunteers, Army and Navy rescue teams, as well as the Civil Air Patrol planes and helicopters and motorboats, combed the area searching for signs of Gus Engeling. One newspaper reported on the conditions faced by the teams, quote, 20-degree temperatures in the watery bottomland early Saturday morning, and a chill wind that continued through the day added to the misery of men wading in the swamp. National Guard field kitchen crews served coffee and food, but nobody ever got warm. Finally, as one group worked their way across the swamp fingertip to fingertip, the biologist's body was found lodged under 2 logs in the wide creek. He had suffered a shotgun wound to the face. A pair of gold-rimmed glasses, which didn't belong to Engeling, were later found nearby. A local black man named Alton was soon apprehended, charged, and quickly tried, convicted, and sentenced to death on the charge of murder with malice, specifically. He was electrocuted within the year. The trial was held in Palestine in Anderson County and followed closely by local newspapers. It's important to note that Paris's name was circulated in newspapers before he was even charged, which you can see in a little tiny text right here. Who was Alton Paris, and what was so important about those ducks? Examining the local newspapers from the search and the subsequent trial give us a glimpse into our second expanded environment, a racially charged, extremely dynamic social ecosystem. When discussing this case, we can't avoid the realities of life in Jim Crow-era East Texas, a potentially dangerous place for Black residents who were systematically denied equal access to public resources, including public lands like the WMA. Even though the WMA wasn't accessible for any duck hunting by anyone in 1951, the goal was ultimately to improve populations enough to open the area for sport hunting, which was an activity increasingly enjoyed by Texans' white populations. According to reporting, Alton Paris was known to the authorities for previous poaching incidents. He was a Black 59-year-old husband who newspapers identified as a, quote, father of 13 children and resident of a shack near the reservation. The 1950 census lists 3 generations living at the Paris residence, 7 children aged 22 to 11, and 2 grandsons, aged 9 and 4. Paris is listed as a farmer as his occupation, and the family lived roughly 2 miles away from the WMA in Bethel, a small community with a population of less than 100 in 1951. We know Engeling had caught Paris poaching 2 ducks that day. Local newspapers reported that he initially confessed to the murder outright and said that he shot the game warden, quote, because he couldn't outrun him. However, Paris later recanted his confession, stating that it was coerced under the threat of violence. He never denied shooting Engeling, but he instead insisted that it was accidental as opposed to intentional. Looking specifically at this claim of a coerced confession and his denial of intent to kill Engeling reveals a lot of enlightening context. Within hours of Engeling being reported missing, Paris was apprehended for questioning and even led law enforcement to other places within the WMA that he had previously hunted in. He was released to return home after this, with the understanding that he would return to the jail for more questioning later. However, over the course of the next 2 days, Paris was interrogated in Palestine, and that Saturday was taken here to Austin for a lie detector test. Newspapers reported that he outsmarted the lie detector, whatever that means. When questioned by the prosecution, Paris frequently claimed memory problems, and the defendant stated that he did not remember signing the written confession which was transcribed for him by the sheriff's department, following his initial verbal confession. He also stated that he was unable to read the document. According to Anderson County Sheriff Roy Harrington, who we can see right here, kind of blurry, he's holding 2 pairs of gold-rimmed glasses. The glasses found at the scene of the crime prompted Paris's confession, according to Harrington. When questioning the suspect, the sheriff informed Paris that his wife had already identified the glasses as his. However, Harrington also admits to fabricating this identification, stating, "Best part was, I hadn't even seen his wife." The fullest text of his confession found in this research reads, "We passed the 2 ducks I had killed, and he had stopped and picked them up. It looks like you're having a little luck," he said. Then I started running. He hollered to halt, but I kept on running. I looked back, and he was gaining on me. I started across a log, and I thought I got ahead of him, but he was closer than ever. He was running fast, throwing up water and making an awful fuss. Then he got too close, and I whirled and shot. He just throwed up those ducks straight up and fell over backwards. I guess he must have been about 30 feet away. I didn't stop. I just picked up them ducks he dropped and kept on running." During the trial, Paris and his counsel asserted that Sheriff Harrington coerced his original confession under the threat of violence. Paris repeatedly denied he had slain Engeling deliberately and insisted that it was obtained under threat of physical violence. Sorry, got ahead of myself. He told the court Anderson County Sheriff Roy Harrington had said, "If you don't tell the truth, I'll let that mob come in and get you." This threat of mob violence may or may not have been fictitious. No records of a lynch mob was found in this research. However, it would not have been especially unusual for the region, and there were hundreds of people searching for Engeling in the swamp over the weekend. Whether real or imagined, this threat of mob violence was a very real threat for a man in Alton Paris's circumstances. Regarding the claim of murder with malice specifically, the state claimed that evidence indicated Paris shot at Engeling while the Negro was hidden in the underbrush. The newspaper reporting the trial didn't indicate what evidence the prosecutors provided for this claim. Paris stated that the murder weapon, a 12-gauge shotgun, discharged accidentally, claiming that it failed, causing it to discharge as the safety failed, causing it to discharge as he ran. Paris's defense also claimed that key evidence presented against him was taken without a search warrant, including a shotgun and shells, and a pair of overalls that supposedly had human blood on them. The newspaper also notes that the expert witness regarding these overalls testified that it was impossible to establish the blood type with such a small amount of blood found on the garment. Despite this, Paris was quickly found guilty of murder with malice and sentenced to death. While in jail, Paris repeatedly attempted to appeal his sentence, all of which were rejected. He also attempted to break out of the penitentiary twice during this time. Both failed. The day before his execution, the guards at Huntsville State Penitentiary reported that Paris was, quote, extremely nervous during the day, read his Bible continuously, and told his guards, "White folks, why don't you all get me out of this? I surely need some help." He had refused any special food for his final meal, and when asked for a last statement, Paris merely shook his head in a negative manner, but as he was being strapped into the chair, he was seen to mutter what was apparently an inaudible prayer. Less than a year after Gus Engeling's death, at 12:03 a.m. on December 2nd, 1952, Alton Paris was led into the death chamber and strapped into the electric chair. His first shock was administered at 12:06 a.m. Paris was pronounced dead at 12:09 a.m. I don't truly know Paris's motivations for illegally hunting that day, whether hunting for dinner or hunting for sport. It's important to remember that the WMA was new, and so were the regulations now imposed within its invisible boundaries. However, beyond these boundaries, sifting through local reporting reveals a climate of fear from the outset and a racially charged trial. This second clipping that I just put up is from the Chicago Defender, which is an African-American newspaper from the Times. All of the other newspapers were from Tyler or the surrounding area. What is justice in this case? To restore a fractured ecosystem, we have to learn what's truly been there over the years, instead of ignoring the uncomfortable realities permeating the land itself. There's profound loss and there's profound fear. There are attempts at justice and reconciliation. But more than anything, it's important to remember in telling these stories that the families still carry the ultimate weight of this tragedy. In 2020, on Engeling's Officers Memorial website, one of Paris's great-great-grandchildren commented, "I'm sorry for what happened."